Hey everybody, welcome to a very special episode of Well Met. Here we are doing something that's not going to make sense at first, but we're calling it the Year of the Kraken Review. I'm John Horstman. With me, of course, is Kevin Hovdestad, J.R. Cook. We're all here. We're really excited to dive right in. We've got a bunch of people hanging out with us in chat and all sorts of things. This literally just hit maybe 3 or 4 hours ago, so we're really excited to take it to you, and we're not going to make you wait any longer. Kevin, this has been a huge day. First, happy birthday. What better surprise than getting this on your birthday? So I'm going to let you do the honors. Tell us the news.
The news is nuts. Yeah, like John says, this came out earlier this afternoon, and it's all we've had the opportunity to talk or think about all day. Hearthstone's development team announced earlier today that they are introducing play formats in Hearthstone. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the concept, as it crosses over from other trading and collectible card games, when the size of a game gets to a certain point, many of the different card games that are out there introduce formats where only certain parts of the entire set of cards that have ever been printed are legal for competitive play. There will be different formats, and you can play in tournaments or events or ladders or what have you that utilize those different formats. But at the end of the day, there are restrictions on what cards are legal for play in a given format. And for the first time ever in Hearthstone, there is going to be a division between multiple sets of formats. Today, they announced what they're going to call the standard format, which will be the block of cards that is eligible for Hearthstone Championship Tour competitive play and the ladder that will earn points towards the Hearthstone Championship Tour, as well as Wild, which is what they're referring to as sort of the classic Hearthstone that you know today, where every card is legal for play.
Yeah, that's a really good summary, Kev. It's almost like you wrote the notes on that or something.
I may have.
Yeah, so I think you summed it up really well. We're going to take it very linearly with you guys and go through the actual webpage that Blizzard has posted up. So if you want to check it out... Oh, go ahead, Kev.
Before we do that, we should note we're doing this on Twitch and for our YouTube channel. We are going to do a separate conversation about this, obviously, during the regular Well Met show. So this will be a part of our standard Sunday show and on the regular podcast feed. So if you want the more in-depth conversation, that'll happen Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific or podcast feed on Monday.
Yes. Shameless plug.
Thank you.
Very nice.
How shameless is it when it's our channel?
It's not shameless. You're right. So we're going to go ahead and jump through the page as the Hearthstone team has posted it. If you want to check it out, of course, it'll be below in the video, as well as just go to battle.net/Hearthstone, guys. It's not hard. And you can read it all up right there. It's all pointed to you. You'll know exactly where you're going. So let's jump in. All right, guys. I'm going to take us down through the list here. First, Ben Bro did post a nice kind of 3.5 minute video. For those who don't like to do a lot of reading, you can go check that out. Everyone loves to hear Ben Bro talk, so definitely go ahead, check that out. But here we go. The new standard. The first thing, the big thing is we are getting a new way to play Hearthstone. It is called Standard. As Kevin said earlier, basically it's the current year and previous years card pool, I guess I would say, as well as basic and classic cards. So the way it works then is there's a new play mode called Standard. You still have ranked and unranked, but in this mode, you'll only play the select cards from the select card pool that is part of the current Standard format. It will go towards your rank and all those different things. It is also going to be the format for the Hearthstone World Championship Tour going forward, as well as the other seasonal preliminaries and championships. Now, Kevin, I may be wrong, but Standard is not going to be a part of the winter preliminaries and championships, correct?
We don't know. The straight answer is we don't know. Now, my understanding, just given the way this is played out, and we were going to talk about this further down, but we'll just cut straight to it, is that this is going to be a change that's going to have to roll between the completion of the Winter Championship and the beginning of the spring season. I would almost guarantee that, because all of the qualifiers, all of the events leading up to this point will have been played in one format, and it would be really awkward to make that switch midway. This isn't the same as something like the Patron nerf, for example, which dropped the Warsong Commander nerf that dropped right before the Hearthstone World Championship and sort of shook up the meta within an existing card set. This is actually designed to line up with the launch of the Spring 2016 expansion. To do all of that, to introduce a new expansion and take away 2 full sets of cards, for example, like between now and the Winter Preliminaries, or between the Preliminaries and the Winter Championship, I think is probably untenable and not good for the health of the game. It would be really awkward. It would be really confusing for everyone, right? The players, the casters, the audience. Like, no one would have time to acclimatize to that. So my expectation is that we will get through the current, not only the current ranked play season, but the current sort of pro cycle season, which is slated to end in late March anyways. So they could drop this pretty much when we're kind of expecting, sometime in the like early April-ish window, lining up with a new ladder season as well as the new pro circuit season.
Yeah, it's possible. I was thinking March or April. It might even line up with PAX East.
They could wait that long. It would feel like a really long time.
Yeah, it would.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think they've been really intentional with the with their terminology. Obviously, it's the Winter Championships, and on the page here, I'm looking for it right now. It does say that the changes are going to happen during the spring expansion, and so if they're either that was a huge oversight, or they're definitely saying, hey, this is happening after the Winter Championships. So if you are going to Winter Championships or preliminaries, don't worry. This shouldn't affect you too much. Yet, Kevin, you don't have to worry about learning how to cast an entirely new meta and all that kind of stuff all at once. You get some practice.
I honestly, like, that was my first thought. I did spend a lot of my day today just sort of like trying to hash through the logistics of like, okay, what does this do to ranked play? What does this do to our expectations of how the game will be played? What does this do to existing meta decks? What does this do to, change our expectations of what cards might have to be printed in the next set? Because all of a sudden, you're not worried in the same ways you used to be about things like power creep or seeing cards that fulfill the same role as other cards. A whole bunch of stuff is leaving the current playable set in a way that will mean that we probably are going to see cards that fulfill similar roles, because I don't think you can say at this point that the game doesn't need a card like an Anti-Keelbot or a Belcher or a Lotheb or whatever. They fulfill a niche within the game that was designed to be filled, and now we're at a point where the size of the game had sort of reached critical mass. Like, we were all kind of like, okay, like, what do you add now? The game is kind of like, how do you add a competitive 4-drop to the game that's interesting? Well, you take old ones away. and that, but there's going to be vacancies that have to be filled, right? There's going to be points for certain classes, whether it's minions in the early game or late game removal or what have you, that were part of expansion sets that have to be reintroduced in some capacity, and in some cases already have been.
Yeah, I will say that on the website, like they say, the spring 2016 expansion, on the media that they sent out, press releases that they sent out, they said this would release sometime in spring 2016. So there is a little bit different between the two, but on the press release it says this will happen in spring 2016. So I would say March, April, May. One of those 3 months. Probably March or April, to be honest.
So going back to this new standard format, Kevin, you're kind of starting to touch on it a little bit. Do you guys think, we've been talking a lot about power creep in Hearthstone lately? I know, JR, we've had really colorful discussions about power creep in Hearthstone and how we feel about it. Does this do a good job at addressing power creep for you guys? And JR, because I know you are much more passionate about it right now, I'm going to let you take this one first.
I'm not that passionate about it, to be honest, but no, I think it does in a way, because it allows them, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more with some of these other discussion points that we have, but I think it allows them to design the game in a bubble now, design the expansions in a bubble, because now you can plan out your entire year of what Hearthstone is going to look like. and not have to worry about these other cards that aren't going to be in that set. You're still going to do that for Wild format, but it's probably not going to be as important as Standard, just like Magic kind of does with their system a little bit. But so with that said, like things like Reno Jackson, which is huge power creep in a little bit of a way that it's kind of ridiculous in what it can do. In a year or so, Reno's not going to matter anymore. When you look at cards like Evil Heckler, being a little bit of a better card than Booty Bay Bodyguard. Well, in the future, Evil Heckler isn't going to be in the set anymore. So then you'll still have the Booty Bay Bodyguard, which will be a little bit worse than Evil Heckler. So I think in a way it does, because it allows them to design the game more in a bubble and allows them to plan out the way that they see Hearthstone going in a year or two, much more in advance without having to worry as much about older cards.
Kevin, what do you think?
I mean, I think the simple answer is the possibility that a card could be designed that is really good or better than current cards on a given mana cost still exists. I mean, there's nothing to say that we won't, as a community, say that is the best new 4-drop when Piloted Shredder goes away. Something could come out that ostensibly is the best based on whatever variable we decide to assign to it, stickiness, health value, whatever. Cards have always sort of had that situation, right? And I look at old cards with drawbacks, stuff like Venture Co Mercenary, which everybody said was, amazing, and think like now that card is kind of awful, and the idea of playing it feels really bad. So the nature of what constitutes power creep will change as new ideas and new mechanics are introduced as well, because we don't have at this point the full scope of what future cards could look like in front of us. What we're talking about right now is really just the extrication of old cards and what that does in terms of design space. I mean, the short answer really is, to JR's point, probably yes, because anything that gets added also eventually gets removed. And they can now very happily make a brand new 4/3/4 mech with a death rattle that says do whatever, right? Because they're not just making Shredder Light or Shredder Junior or Shredder the Better. Like, they can now reintroduce those things in a way that maybe they're happier with long term. And I love that. I think it's great.
Great. So let's go down the page a little bit and talk about kind of the second format, which really isn't a new format, but it's renaming as this, as kind of competitive play has kind of gotten chopped into. Now we've got Wild play as well. So in Hearthstone, we've got something called Wild, which basically is just now going to be free for all. There's still going to be rankings for it. They still go towards all your quests, just like Standards does. There's no cards negated from the pool. It's literally just like the ranked ladder as we know now. How do you guys like Wild? Do you guys have an affinity towards one or the other? Do you think one is more enticing? Do you think one will be more popular between the two? What do you think?
I think Standard, of the two, Standard is going to be the more popular, just because it's going to be the more competitive route and the one that's going to change the most in between years. Because by changing out, removing sets and adding in new sets, it's going to change the meta very drastically and keep it fresh. Especially if, and we haven't talked about this yet, especially if they change how the classic and basic set works, which is something they've already talked about they're probably going to have to do. But just in general, though, it's Wild is still going to have that place. Like, it's Hearthstone with everything that you own, every card that you've ever owned, and you can build wild and crazy decks with it. And for me, that's going to be what I prefer, to be honest, because that's why I like the game to begin with. But I know that on the competitive scene, it's absolutely going to be Standard, because that's absolutely how other trading card games work.
Kevin, anything else to add to that?
No, I mean, I think JR hit the nail on the head. I will add, just because I think it's funny, as my controversial opinion to this, Wild only exists because they don't want to give people back dust or anything to just eliminate the old cards. At this point, I think what they're saying is they want to take old cards out of the game. And because people want to complete the set, because they like the idea of keeping their old cards, whatever, you're going to have the ability to play them in this old kind of Wild West, unsanctioned, anything goes format that isn't going to be a strict balance consideration. Like, bottom line, this is a set that they no longer consider worth paying attention to. They're not going to go back and rebalance old GVG cards as new things come out that maybe create synergies that are more powerful than they expected, because that's what you get if you go play Wild. Like, that's just a known quantity at this point. So instead, I think Standard is the way the game is meant to be played, and Wild is kind of a way to reach out and say, look, like, keep playing with your old cards, enjoy the things you worked with, try some stuff that's fun, but Standard is the game now. And that's very much how they're presenting it in terms of Standard's what matters for the Championship Tour. Standard will likely be what's played in every other competitive tournament. I don't think you'll see a lot of people advocating for Wild tournaments, because as soon as new sets continue to build up, we're going to get to a point where that's not even going to be interesting. It's not going to be sustainable to pay attention to.
Yeah. All right. I think you're both pretty definitive on that. So let's talk about, this is what I'm honestly really intrigued about, this next part. So under time for reflection, basically Team 5 has said that they're going to reevaluate a lot of the basic and classic cards. Cough Druid combo, Cough Fireball, Frostbolt, all these different cards here, and reevaluate a lot of the fundamental cards that have been with Hearthstone since day one. A lot of us have been talking about, hey, this isn't going to change Druid at all or Freeze Mage at all, because most of them are in the classic or basic set. So these really strong decks that are both tier 1 right now, according to Tempo Storm, Freeze Mage is top of tier 2, Tempo Mage is tier 1. These really good decks aren't going to see any changes, but the Hearthstone team has said that we're going to basically reevaluate all classic and basic cards. We don't know how large or small that could be. I would imagine it's more than just a few cards, though. Do you guys think that we're going to see some major changes to these basic and classic cards, Kev?
Yeah, I mean, they did kind of touch on that in the PC Gamer interview that Ben Brode did. I don't think there's like a firm commitment, because I don't think they've probably made the final decisions yet, although they must be very close, given that this new expansion can't be very far away. But they basically, he told PC Gamer that it's a number between 2 and 20, right? There are more than 2 cards they want to change, but certainly less than 20. And I personally like looking through the basic and classic cards. I think the basic set is probably pretty safe, but I think there's a lot of stuff in the classic set where they've even openly said over the course of time that there were cards that prevented them from doing things they wanted to do. Sake of argument, right? Ben Brode was very specific and open about the fact that it was Master of Disguise that prevented them from making animated armor a neutral minion. And that changed their design space plans for League of Explorers. They would have done that differently had Master of Disguise not been in play. And I think there's a lot of that stuff where they can now go back and they can say, okay, what problems do we create for ourselves by having Bloodlust or Savage Roar or Force of Nature or... basically, I think they're going to look at every charge minion. They're going to look at every silence. They're going to look at everything right now that is played as a significant win condition card. And they're going to say, does this ultimately have a major impact on what we want to do with the game as a whole moving forward if these cards are going to be in play ad infinitum?
So I hadn't read that interview yet, actually. So what they're doing then is basically they're looking at changing the cards themselves instead of possibly removing them from that set or changing the set around, so only maybe they can swap cards in and out, because that's what I had assumed they were going to do, was be able to just, okay, these are the basic cards and these are the classic cards that you can use in the set, and then when a new year comes around, they might go, okay, we're going to swap these out and swap these in.
And they haven't said anything to that effect at this point. One of the things that was kind of on our list of things to talk about later on is there the possibility that they might move cards between sets? Might we see some cards that are really core to the way the game is played that are part of, for example, GVG, added to the classic set, or cards that were really core to the classic set added to the basic set? Because that's something that we've all talked about for years as a way to solve some of the new player experience. Broad strokes, though, I think what you're going to see is likely as not, the basic and classic sets stay the way they are and cards be modified outright.
Yeah, that would make sense, I guess, especially when they get into the whole, like, we haven't talked about this yet either, but when they get into the whole, like, shop sets that are completely removed and you can't buy them anymore. How do you get those cards that they might end up putting into classic? That would be weird if you already have a full classic set like I do, and then all of a sudden there's these additional cards added to it later on.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to move things from one set to another. We were going to talk about it, but I don't think that's on the table.
Yeah. Let's talk about this next one on the list then. And this is exciting. You guys have been asking for it for a long time. It's another 9 deck slots. Golf clap.
Golf clap.
Golf clap. It's another 9, but you're already splitting. Wow, I didn't realize that. We don't get to play that one often. That one's long.
It's quite long.
Yeah, you always say it is.
Right. Well, it just feels weird. Anyways, so you got another game type that you can play in, but you got another page of deck slots. So immediately I have to ask you, going from 9 to 18, but going from one ranked mode to 2, is this really more deck slots, or do you think that this is kind of meh? JR, what's your reaction?
It was absolutely needed with the change that they made, especially if you want to have one of your slides be just entire standard decks and another be entire wild decks. However, if you only want to play standard, then you have, or wild, then you have, double the deck slots, double the fun. I don't use them all anyway, so it doesn't affect me. But I will probably with the two different set formats. Right.
You just have Face Hunter, Secret Paladin, and Aggro Shaman, right? Those are the 3?
Yeah, and yeah, you're right. That's all.
Yeah.
And
there's got to be a mid-range druid in there somewhere.
Then I'm going to add another Face Hunter back with Wild, or with Standard, I mean, and just play that as well.
Well, it's got to be, you got to have Aggro Druid there, because that was the first deck you hit Legend with. So that one never goes away.
Rip.
It always reserves.
No Bell Reaver. Rip.
Oh,
well, that'll be my Wild deck. That'll be my Wild deck. And then my Standard deck will just be Face Hunter or Mid-Range Druid.
Aggro Shaman's still pretty playable in Standard. Doesn't lose much.
Yeah. So anyways, we're digressing here. We don't have a lot of time. We need to keep going through this. So next on the list, release the Kraken. So standard format we already talked about, but here's specifically the sets that it's going to include so that everyone knows. It's going to include basic cards, classic cards, Blackrock Mountain, so maybe we'll see the return of dragons. The Grand Tournament, maybe we'll finally have a place for some jousting decks, maybe. And then we've got the League of Explorers and the Spring 2016 expansion. This is the year of the Kraken. I was trying to find a nice big roar soundbite. I couldn't find one. I'll have one for Sunday, though.
You got to get that thing from that movie, what's his name? No. What's his name? Saying release the Kraken. That would have been the thing to do.
Yep, very good. I'll put it on the list. So
you get time. We can do that for Sunday.
So let's talk a little bit about how these older expansions now, how you're going to acquire these cards, because this is kind of interesting. This is a source of a lot of controversy. So basically how it works now is how it's going to work is adventures and expansions that are not part of the standard format will no longer be available for purchase from the shop. So this year that's going to include Naxxramas and Goblins versus Gnomes. One of the key things here, though, is if you have not purchased the first wing with either gold or real money, not only can you, not acquire the cards that way, but you also can't play through the expand, or the adventure modes themselves. So you can't play through Naxxramas. You can't have the great Kel'Thuzad battle that you get at the end of that one to unlock that card. Instead, you just basically you get those cards by using dust. That's the only way to craft them is by dust. There's no other packs to get. Those will be removed from the store. All those different things. JR, how do you feel about this? I know a lot of people are really conflicted. They're maybe a little bit upset. Some people are like, big deal. Where do you land on this?
So personally, it doesn't affect me. It really doesn't. I have what I need. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I have a coworker who's very upset and is talking about quitting the game entirely because he's a free-to-play player. He's been focusing on GVG, and he doesn't have like Blackrock Mountain yet, for example, which he's like, oh shoot, now I need to go and get that before it goes away. But then he's like, but I've been focusing so much on GVG to try to be competitive that it's going away in like 2 months or so, right? That now he's like, well, I wasted all that time when I could have been focusing on these other sets instead, and now I'm going to be behind even more when I've been trying to get, my piloted shredders and my Dr. Boom and the good cards from those sets. So that kind of sucks for him. But as I also think it's kind of crummy from a new player that wanted to go back and experience certain adventure modes and those really cool boss battles, that if they show up in a year from now, they're not going to be able to even go back and try it unless they borrow someone's account that had it or something like that. And I feel like that's content that they're taking away from the game. And I'm not too happy about that either. I just wish that they had a happy medium somewhere where they still kind of allowed them, allowed that stuff to be there at least. So it's probably the one change that I'm not like extremely pleased with. It doesn't affect me personally, but it doesn't overshadow all of the good changes that they've done with this.
Kevin.
I mean, I think JR pretty much exhausted that one. I will say I don't think it's a huge issue in the long run for the game that we are currently playing, the design of the game that we are currently enjoying. I did at one point really think there was a lot of value in seeing Blizzard introduce single-player content to the game, adding puzzles and adventure mode and stuff that people could do so that if they weren't interested in playing the competitive multiplayer aspect of the game, there was something there to draw a different kind of player to this platform. Especially because it's available on mobile. That felt like such an obvious fit on iOS and Android. To see them just say like, nope, we're just going to keep moving the game forward as a competitive platform, to me says, okay, fine, that's not on the agenda. I have no problem with it. I'm not losing any sleep over it. I think it's pretty safe to say for most people that they played through the adventure to get the cards. As awful as that maybe sounds, like people want to get back to playing the game they know, because as it stands, there's no special benefit to the solo single-player content side of the game. It's their gating method for when those cards enter the competitive meta, and that's basically it.
Cool. Well, we pretty much exhausted this page. There is a big, long FAQ full of little kind of nuances and general questions that you might have, so definitely go check that out if you have more questions. But let's just discuss this a little bit more here as we get ready to wrap up. And the first one I wanted to ask you guys is, which classes or decks or archetypes are taking the biggest hit with these new changes? I know I'm throwing you on the spot here, but I know, Kevin, you had a couple initial thoughts of some deck archetypes that are just completely not viable anymore now that this is going. Obviously, Mech Mage, goodbye. So I'll take that one. I'll take that easy one off the table. But what other ones are we going to see have a drastic change as we move into this new standard format?
I mean, I think what you're going to see is you're going to see basically every class that started to get a leg up beginning with goblins versus gnomes, right? If you remember back to, and I know that's a long time ago, but remember back to prior to goblins versus gnomes, there were a lot of decks that were super competitive that instantaneously were overshadowed by all of the new sticky minions, the new mech synergies, the new weapons, the new removal. Just off the top of my head, this massacres every variant of Paladin that has ever been competitive. All of them. I mean, Secret Paladin might still be a thing in a new form after this, but it won't be as good. It has none of the curve. It has none of the like early game power that it has now.
Doesn't have the sticky minions.
Zoo is going to hurt because it lost a lot of the sticky minions. It lost a lot of the death rattle minions that make all of the legend level Zoo decks right now so popular.
I mean, pre-Nax Zoo was pretty good.
It was good, but I mean, it wouldn't, I don't think, hold up.
It's
today.
Not as good, right?
Yeah. Patron is toast. No Death Bite, no Unstable Ghoul. Just not enough ways to activate patrons in general. Oil Rogue. I mean, literally the name of the deck is Oil, and that card and a whole bunch of the stuff that makes that fly, all gone. And like you said, mech, all flavors of mech. Like not just mage, but every other mech deck, they're all toast. And it adds some like interesting questions about, for example, if you were to run something like GorillaBot, which is still technically playable in Standard, it has to discover cards from the legal set, right? When Standard hits, no card can create, discover, whatever, a card that isn't part of the legal Standard set. The only exception to that being Ball of Spiders. Ball of Spiders will still summon Web Spinners. But the Web Spinner itself can't have a Death Rattle that generates a card, a beast card from Nax, for example. Like, that can't happen. So GorillaBot's going to be really awful. There's not a lot of mechs for it to discover. And they're not very good. They're all the mechs that existed prior to GVG. And the like handful, I guess, that have been introduced since, but there's not very many. So there's lots of sort of open questions about what this does in that respect to a lot of decks that could have been viable, and a lot of cards that could have been viable. But we also don't know at all what Blizzard's strategy is as far as filling any of those gaps with new cards.
Yeah. What the other thing? Yeah, go ahead. The other thing it's just going to hurt is all of the big cards that came out in Nax and GVG that really turned the meta around and have been staples in decks since they came out, such as Pile Shredder being probably the most powerful card in the game. It's gone. It's played in almost every deck. Dr. Boom, the number one legendary you've been wanting to craft all this time, gone. So you're going to have a new, turn 7 that you're going to need to look at. And so there's going to be a lot of decks that are going to look very much different. Like, for example, mid-range Druid is still going to be good, depending on if they change anything in Classic or Basic set. But it's going to be missing Dr. Boom. It's going to be missing Piloted Shredder.
Shaded Naxxramas. Yeah. There's lots of stuff that won't be there anymore.
Right.
Cool. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, and I want to talk to you guys a little bit more about Wild format. So Wild format, again, is just the wide open, free-for-all, Wild Wild West format that we have. With it not being the competitive format for Hearthstone going forward, do you think that this is going to be a very popular format? Do you think that there's going to be a lot of people playing it? And if you had to guess, what do you think that split is going to look like, Kevin?
I'm the wrong person to ask, okay? Because I will not play Wild. I think Wild will die a terrible death. And it will have a place for a period of time right now because there are lots of people who have broad collections that include a lot of the discontinued sets. But going forward, no one will go back. No one will go back and craft those cards. To give you a rough perspective, the gold it would have cost you to buy all of Naxxramas to play through the entire adventure and get all of those cards will buy you 2 of its legendaries. Roughly, like in terms of the gold / money to dust math. No one's going to craft them, and no one's going to go back and try to craft all of those competitive cards to play in a format that isn't competitive. The pool of players will be so narrow, it will be very difficult to hit legend or rank up at all in Wild. There's no competitive players, like no one who wants to try to be a part of the pro competitive scene playing in Wild. Plus, let's just be very clear here. Standard's going to be cool. Standard's the new thing. Standard's exciting. Everybody's super amped to see what the new meta looks like in Standard. I don't think the same resources are going to exist for Wild that will exist for Standard. I think all of the third-party websites, all of the meta reports, all of that stuff will only ever address Standard. So Wild is just going to be kind of left to rot by the community as a whole. That's my immediate gut reaction.
JR, you like weird things. Do you like Wild?
I absolutely love it, and it's what I would want to play. But I'm with Kevin on the reasons why, and a lot of that is because of what I feel is a mistake with what they're doing with not allowing you to buy or be able to easily get discontinued cards. And so as time goes on, Wild is going to be less and less significant. Here at the beginning, it's not going to make... I don't think it's going to make too much of an impact in the next year or two. But after that, it's going to decrease dramatically, and the only people that are going to be playing it are old timers like me. That by that time, I'm going to have this big old long beard that's going to beat Kevin's. I'm going to be like, back in my day when I played my mid-range druid with this stuff, and Piloted Shredder is awesome, and Dr. Boom, and you guys don't have it, so I'm going to win. So that's what I'm going to say with my long beard.
Okay. JR. Unbelievable. So we've already talked about when we think Standard will land. We've kind of hit a lot of these things. I'm trying to look down the list here. Is there any last minute things that we really need to touch on here before we get out of here?
I mean, I think it's worth mentioning, at least in passing. I think Standard is super healthy for the game. Like, I mean, I know that we've kind of talked through this notionally on the show a lot. I know that this has come up in conversation with people asking a lot of questions of us as to how do we reduce the barrier to entry for new players. And we really haven't touched that at this point on this stream. But this is really good for someone who's coming into the game new, because now there's a fixed amount of investment required to get into Hearthstone. It's no longer a overwhelming and constantly growing thing. You can basically look at the game now, and when Standard hits and we get this new expansion, we can go to people and we can say, okay, you need Blackrock Mountain, League of Explorers, and probably like one big bulk purchase of packs from each expansion. And even within that, honestly, depending on how significant the cards from this next set are, you may be able to tell people, like, you don't need a ton of TGT, or you don't need a ton of the brand new cards. So all of a sudden, it's realistic within, you know, certain expectations of how competitive you want to be able to go to somebody and say, yeah, like, you can play free to play and get, you know, reasonably up to speed, or you can just dump $100 into this game, which I know is not like pocket change, but it's not an ever blooming number of dollars that just keeps rising forever, and say, okay, yeah, there, now you're invested enough to be a part of the competitive scene, to feel like you can play competitively. Where today, now, I don't think we can say that. And we were actively concerned that the next expansion would mean, okay, now it's like you need core legendaries from GVG, core minions and spells from TGT, every adventure mode, because the cards were so powerful. Up until today, we very actively told listeners and people who emailed the show, like, when you first get into the game, your initial investment vector should be buy Nax and craft Dr. Boom. Like, that was, and that wasn't just us, that was everybody. That was like the best advice you could give someone for getting started on being competitive. This is a huge change in terms of taking, I mean, A, those things away, and B, just constraining the size of the initial purchase price of this game.
Do you think, though, with only 2 years that, well, yes, the purchase price is down. It's obviously a revolving purchase price at that point. Do you think that 2 years is enough for a free-to-play player to be able to keep up with current cards?
Maybe, maybe not. And I mean, it shouldn't be. Like, frankly, it shouldn't be. Because you shouldn't be able to be top-tier competitive and have all of the cards without paying some amount of money to play the game. Like, I don't think that's realistic. And I don't think Blizzard is building the system in a way that would advocate for that. I don't think they want a system where if you just, you know, maxed your gold intake every day from winning 30 games and hitting your daily quests and doing your tavern brawl every week, that you could actually conceivably never spend any money on the game. That would be bad for them. But I think it's way better than it was, because now there's an upper boundary, right? I'm not as worried about the lower boundary. I'm not as worried about the free-to-play experience, because you can't make the game optimal for those people or it dies. But at the upper boundary, you can now say safely, like, you'll never have to pay more than X dollars to get what you need to join the game at any point in the future.
I think if you are a free-to-play player that is playing competitively, for Standard specifically, this is a much better change for you, for the simple fact that as cards go out, you can just get rid of them all, because you're never going to play them again, and have that dust to be able to get a head start on the next set that comes out.
I mean, I made this point when we were talking about this privately before we actually got together to do this reaction video. If you aren't going to use cards in Wild, like if you're just not going to play Wild, you can dust the Nax set, which previously you couldn't dust. You couldn't get anything back from that. You can dust it for 3,300 dust, which would let you craft a lot of cards from the next set. Like if you open, for sake of argument, like 40 packs from the next set, depending on the size of the set, that probably gets you all of the commons, most of the rares, a couple of epics, and a legendary. You can now go through that set a week or two later, figure out what people have started using in competitive decks that are showing up on the ladder that you're seeing online, and craft a bunch of it. Craft half a dozen of the epics that you feel you need to make your deck lists work, or grab a couple of the really Dr. Boom level legendaries that come out in the new set. Like, if you don't care to complete the sets, if you don't care to own every card, and I mean, I'm the worst person to talk to about this, because I like the notion of owning all the cards, but I also hate the notion of having all of that money and dust sunk into cards that I'm not going to use, because I'm not going to play Wild. I never for a day am I going to play Wild. I'm only going to play Standard. So, I mean, at some point, maybe you just decide, like, yeah, I'm just going to shuffle my investment forward into new cards that are more useful to me.
Yeah, I'm curious, and this might be a discussion on Sunday. I'm curious to see if they'll reprint cards.
I was just going to ask you that. The last question I wanted to ask you guys, just obviously we don't know anything. This has been out for 4 or 5 hours.
We're just talking out our butts. We have no idea. We're
just speculating. But reprints, do you think that we will see reprints going further?
They can just do it. Sorry, what?
Sorry, your mic broke up. Start again.
Oh, I think one way that they can do it is have, like, let's use Haunted Creeper for example. It's going away. Let's say they want to reprint it in one of these future sets. They can possibly make it available in one of the future sets while also keeping it available in the old set. So, like, if you already own it in the old set, then you automatically get it in the new set. And if they do reprints, I hope that's the way that they do it.
Kevin?
Not a hope. Not a hope. I mean, yes, that would be obviously awesome for those of us who've been around for a long time, but that runs totally contrary to the whole point of Standard. It shouldn't be advantageous to people who have old cards and can go back and access cards that they invested in sets that were discontinued and removed from Standard.
That's how Magic the Gathering works.
Sure, but that's where cards are permanent and can be bought and traded and stuff in a very different way. In a digital space, like, I mean, from a monetization perspective, that doesn't make any sense, right? Blizzard is absolutely, if they want like a 1/2 Death Rattle spawns 2 1/1s beast minion, they're just going to make a new one, right? Be the haunted, I don't know, mole rat. Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The point is, they're just going to put out new cards. And I mean, this is consistent with everything that we've ever said about their design theory, with the singular notable exception, because we didn't really address this in a great deal of depth earlier, that they are going to do one big sweeping active balance pass on the basic and classic cards, because that's never been done, right? They've maybe changed 1, 2, sometimes 3 cards at a time. So, like, I think there's probably going to be minor tweaks in that set. But no, like, we're not going to see straight reprints. We're never going to see straight reprints. You're going to see cards that fulfill the same objective.
Yeah, all I'm saying is if they ever do reprints, that's the way I would like them to do it, and not the crummy way of, I open a pack, I now have 2 more Haunted Creepers in this new set. I now own 4 Haunted Creepers total. Thanks, Blizzard, for taking my money.
Nah, man, haunted mole rat. That's what it's gonna be.
We're gonna do a player versus player on this on the show.
I bet we are.
That's what we're gonna do. we got to get out of here. We've definitely exhausted our time here. Thank you guys so much for hanging out in chat. Hopefully, it was really fun hanging out with you guys, taking your questions, running through the different details. Yeah, everyone's excited. We're all excited. If you want to hear us talk about it more, check us Sunday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, this same place, twitch.tv/BlizzPro. Also, send us your emails to wellmet@blizzpro.com or tweet us at wellmetpodcast. And of course, if you do really, really like it, even if this is your first time hearing it, you want to find out how you can support the show, go to patreon.com/wellmetpodcast. We're going to go ahead and get out of here, though. Thank you so much again for being here. Kevin, JR, any last minute things you want to say?
Stick around. In about 45 minutes, the Heroes Power Hour will be on. It's a pretty good show if you like Heroes of the Storm. They're going to talk about the new patch that just hit today and all the balance updates, the new hero that came out, and play some games afterwards that they'll invite you to come play with them. So it's
awesome.
Definitely a cool show.
Kevin, happy birthday. Very happy birthday.
Thank you.
And happy February.
Birthday, nothing would make me happier than if you guys could tune in to the winter preliminaries, February 20th and 21st. I'm still super jazzed to have gotten that opportunity. It would mean the world to me if you guys could tune in. Any feedback to me, to Blizzard, would be massively appreciated.
Sure. As for me, thanks for putting up with me putting this all together very last minute, but we got it all together. I think it went really well, and hopefully we can do more of these in the future. We're going to get out of here. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you guys on Sunday. See ya. Bye.
You can find John on Twitter at KickedTripod and on Twitch at twitch.tv/KickedTripod. You can find JR on Twitter at Eldorian and on Twitch at twitch.tv/BlizzPro. And you can find Kevin on Twitter at Lack of Realism and on Twitch at twitch.tv/OdinTV. BlizzPro.com. Beyond Noob.